Take a breath. Get comfortable tonight. We're unlocking a forgotten drawer in history's quiet cabinet. You might not know what's inside, but I promise it hums with stories. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a woman in the Middle Ages, which means, among other things, you are expected to quietly suffer through a great many things. But at the top of that silent list, your period, not because it's rare, not at all. It comes for nearly every woman, nearly every month, and it will keep coming for a great portion of your life. But does anyone talk about it? Oh, absolutely not. You don't have a name for it, not really. The Latin texts might call it menses, or perhaps fluxus. Your neighbor might whisper the time or just nod toward your belly and raise her eyebrows. It's not shameful exactly. It's more like something so ordinary and inconvenient that it's been wrapped in layers of cultural dust. Best not to disturb it. Best not to say too much. You've learned to read the signs, even if you don't speak of them. The ache in your back, the low heaviness in your stomach, the slight warmth that means your body has begun its private monthly protest. You gather the cloth you've hidden away, a repurposed piece of linen, perhaps washed many times, folded neatly and stored where no curious child or chatty mother-in-law will find it. You slip it into your garments like a secret. It is, after all, yours alone to bear. The truth is, this silence didn't happen by accident. It was cultivated gently but firmly by generations of discomfort. The church had its theories, of course. They ranged from the curious to the absurd. Menstrual blood, said some theologians, was the body's way of expelling excess humors, a kind of internal house cleaning, a necessary purge. Others thought it could poison crops, turn wine sour, even dull a sword's edge if the woman stood too close. Do you believe all this? Maybe. Maybe not. It doesn't really matter, because even if you think it's nonsense, you're careful. Careful not to enter the church during your time. Careful not to touch the family bread. Careful not to let the chickens peck where you've washed your linen. Not because you're superstitious, but because it's easier that way. Easier to avoid questions. Easier to not explain what cannot be explained without someone muttering about curses. Here's the funny part. Despite all the rules and restrictions, there's still an unspoken understanding between women. A kind of sisterhood made of eye contact and borrowed cloth. You might not say, "I'm bleeding," but if your neighbor sees you wince as you bend over, she might offer you a small bundle of herbs anyway. If your mother notices you sitting longer than usual near the hearth, she might hand you a warm compress with no questions asked. The silence isn't cold. It's soft, strangely comforting. A woolen blanket over an uncomfortable truth. Historians have struggled with this silence. There are few records, almost no medical texts, that detail how ordinary women dealt with menstruation. You won't find many paintings. You won't find many names. It's as though the topic slipped between the cracks of time. But maybe it didn't slip. Maybe it was placed there, very deliberately folded into the margins. That's not to say people didn't care. They just cared in complicated ways. Some believed that menstrual blood could be used in love spells. A drop in wine, a smear on fabric. Others believed it could drive a man to madness or cure one if used just right. It was powerful, unpredictable, and therefore deeply unsettling. And what do people do with things they can't explain? They cover them in myth. They pretend they're too holy or too dirty to talk about. Here's something even odder. The absence of bleeding could be even more frightening than its arrival. If your cycle stopped, it meant something. Sometimes pregnancy, sometimes illness, sometimes divine punishment. If you were lucky, the local midwife might brew you a bitter tea to bring things back in rhythm. If you were unlucky, you'd be told to pray harder, confess more, and hope you hadn't been secretly cursed. Still, through it all, you carry on. You tend the hearth. You knead the bread. You smile at your children. You press your hand to your side and keep going, because you are not allowed to stop for blood. No one is. There's an academic debate buried in all this. Some scholars believe the medieval world ignored menstruation because it didn't matter to those writing the records, men, mostly monks, who never had to worry about stained tunics or public washing days. Others argue that it mattered deeply, but was hidden intentionally as a form of private resistance, a quiet keeping of knowledge among women away from the pens and parchments of power. Maybe both are true. Maybe you sitting now in your woolen gown on a straw-stuffed bench are part of that quiet resistance, not shouting, not complaining, just surviving, just bleeding, just being. And so, you shift your weight a little, adjust the cloth you're wearing, and glance out the window. The world doesn't pause for you. It never has. But tonight, as you sit with your pain wrapped in linen and silence, someone sees you. Finally. Someone remembers. You've run out of clean cloths again. It's not that you're unprepared. No. You've learned to stash folded rags in the corners of your chest, in the hem of your underdress, and sometimes even sewn into a secret pocket. But this month has been heavier than usual, and the rain has made drying anything a slow, smoky ordeal. So you find yourself over the fire again, holding a damp strip of linen like a sacred relic, willing it to dry faster than nature intends. There's no such thing as disposable here. Cloth is washed, boiled, sun-dried, boiled again if needed. It's one of those tasks no one talks about, but everyone does. Quietly, carefully, because you don't want anyone to see the red stains on the wash line. Not because it's shameful, well, not entirely, but because it invites questions, and questions are dangerous currency in a medieval village. You'd think something so ordinary would be spoken about more openly. But no. Bleeding monthly is part of your life, but also part of your silence. It's something tucked between bread baking and goat milking. You don't announce it, just adjust your gait slightly and try not to flinch when squatting down by the hearth. Historically speaking, people believed strange things about menstruation. Some physicians thought it was the body's way of purging excess humors, specifically female melancholy. Others, with a more poetic flair, said it was tied to the moon, to tides to lunar madness. One 13th century text insisted that a menstruating woman's gaze could kill bees and dull the brightness of mirrors. Bees you repeat silently with a smirk. You should try that on Brother Alaric next time he criticizes your posture during Vespers. You're not alone in this ritual of secrecy. Every woman in your village, your mother, your sister-in-law, even that sullen weaver's apprentice, has her own routine. Some sit on bundles of straw in the woodshed. Others boil willow bark to dull the cramps. A few just grit their teeth and keep walking. There's a kind of unspoken choreography to it, a rhythm, a quiet rhythm that syncs with the cycle of the moon and the cycle of chores. There's a myth that medieval people believed menstruating women were untouchable or dangerous. That's only half true. Yes, some texts declared women unclean, and you might be kept from communion or the holy relics during your time of the month. But in many places, you were still expected to do everything else. You still had to haul water, still had to thresh grain, still had to comfort crying children. If anything, menstruation made your labor even more invisible. And here's the quirky detail: some women wore little bundles of herbs inside their chemise, not just to mask the scent, but to protect against evil spirits. Rosemary, sage, or yarrow tied in bits of cloth pressed against the skin. Not because they were superstitious necessarily, but because scent and ritual offered comfort in a world that gave you very little else. There's an academic debate about whether medieval women used absorbent underwear or any underwear at all. Some scholars argue that medieval women just let it flow standing over straw or moss, especially in poorer households. Others suggest that wealthier women may have used cloth pads fastened with strings or ties, something like the great-grandmother of the sanitary belt. No one knows for sure. What we do know is that they managed, quietly, resourcefully, and with very few options. You lift your cloth from the fire. It's still warm, steaming slightly in the cool air. You press it flat with your hands, then fold it in quarters with practiced precision. Another piece of linen turned into armor. Another small act of survival. Outside, the rain has eased to a gentle patter. The village is quiet except for the chickens cooing in the straw and the faint hiss of your kettle. You take a deep breath and wonder how many women across how many centuries have done exactly what you're doing now. Held a square of cloth, waited, thought about bees and moonlight, and made do. There's dignity in that. Not the kind that ends up in chronicles or sermons, but the quieter, steadier kind that keeps life moving. And maybe that's the real story. Not the bleeding, but the continuing. The way you keep going, tired, sore, unthanked, and still manage to keep the fire burning and the roof patched. Even when your belly aches and your back is stiff. Even when the menfolk don't notice. Especially then, you're lying still, now wrapped in layers of wool. And a scratchy linen shift, your body warm, but your mind pacing. There is a tenderness low in your belly, a slow ache that comes and goes like the tide always returning, just as you think it's eased. You recognize it by now, of course. This month's bleeding has begun. It's not a moment of fear, not anymore, though the first time felt like the end of the world, or at least the end of certainty. But now, it's something else entirely, an inconvenience, a pause, a signal that once again, your body is doing what it does best, without asking your permission. You rise, slowly, careful not to jostle the ache, and light a small stub of candle. Its flame is steady soft, casting the room in flickering amber. There is no such thing as privacy, not really. But in this moment before the household stirs, you can pretend. There's a scrap of soft cloth tucked in the corner of your chest. It's not luxurious, not like the fine linen imported from Flanders that nobility might use for undergarments, but it's yours. Softened by washings and careful folding, this is the square you'll use today. It's called a rags day, though no one says it so kindly. In some households, girls are told to sit on straw mats. In others, to wedge bundles of wool between their thighs, wrapped in yet more cloth, then tied like a little pouch to their waist with a bit of braided cord. Whatever method you found, you know it must be absorbent washable, and if possible, not embarrassing to hang by the hearth later. Because it will hang. Next to socks, to aprons, to the blood of butchers and birth. Nothing is secret in a house this small. And still, no one says a word when they see your bundle there, drying gently in the smoky air. That's the unspoken rule of womanhood. In your world, silence isn't weakness, it's etiquette. Historically, menstrual blood was seen as dangerous, not because of any real threat, but because its mystery unsettled those who weren't invited to understand it. Some physicians' men, of course, wrote that a menstruating woman could sour wine just by walking past it, that she might dull a blade simply by touching it, or wither crops with her breath. It's almost impressive, the list of powers you've supposedly inherited simply by bleeding. You, the destroyer of harvests. You, the unwitting alchemist of decay. But you're not thinking about that now. You're just trying to get through the day without leaking through your skirts. One hand presses gently against your lower belly as you move toward the door. The floor is cold, even through your stockings, and the faint sound of geese in the yard reminds you that the morning will not wait for your cramps to pass. There's bread, to knead a pail, to fill from the well, and if you're lucky, a moment to sit before the boys, return from the fields, loud and hungry. You wince as you bend to pull on your overskirt. The ache sharpens for a moment. You breathe through it, counting the way Sister Marjorie taught you. In for the saints, out for the devils. Not entirely theological, but very effective. She was the one who first gave you cloth after your own mother had passed. She said, better you learn to fold it right than stain all your tunics. Practical wisdom, women's wisdom, the kind no man ever seems to record. Academic debate still lingers today over what women actually used during their periods in the Middle Ages. Some scholars argue that absorbent cloths were the norm. Others insist many women, especially in rural regions, may have used nothing at all, simply letting it flow, washing themselves often, and dressing in darker layers. There's even a whisper of ritualistic bathing in some convents, though no one knows whether it was for cleanliness or penance. Because even in religious life, a menstruating body was considered complicated, a reminder that even cloistered souls were still bound by flesh. You pull your cloak tight around your shoulders and step outside. The air smells of wood smoke and wet earth. You pass a neighbor girl at the corner of the path, her eyes red-rimmed, a telltale smudge of iron scent following behind her. You nod gently. She nods back. No words, just the quiet solidarity of shared survival. Back in the kitchen, you tend to the fire, crouching with careful grace to avoid pressing too much on your belly. There's a clatter of wood behind you as your cousin enters, whistling oblivious. You keep stirring the pot. Beans and herbs today. Warm food helps with the cramps, even if no one has written it down in any fancy Latin text. It's the kind of knowledge passed hand to hand, lip to ear, folded into the fabric of your daily life. The kind that keeps you alive while others argue about virtue and vice. You sit on a small stool when you can shifting the cloth under your shift when it grows heavy. You'll rinse it tonight. You always do. And then fold it carefully with the dignity of someone who knows that even discomfort deserves reverence. Outside, the clouds gather. Rain is coming. It always does. And you will carry on through it, blood and all, because that's what you do. Every month, without applause, without complaint, without anyone writing songs about it. but quietly, persistently, and with the strange power of women who bleed and keep working anyway. You crouch by the hearth, poking at the damp logs with a stick that's more hope than tool. The smoke curls upward in protest. Your knees crack as you rise, another little gift from sleeping on straw that's more twig than mattress. You haven't said a word to anyone yet this morning, but your body's already told its own story. Between the ache in your back and the warmth you feel slowly seeping into the cloth between your legs, you know what that means. Again, it's back. The cycle that comes like clockwork, though. You've never seen a clock. And the first task isn't dealing with the discomfort, it's hiding it. You reach for the folded linen scraps tucked behind the basket of onions. They're not washed. Not properly. Not the way you'd like. But clean enough for now. In the Middle Ages, your options for menstrual management are what we'd now call limited. There are no convenient aisles of sanitary products, no hushed commercials with blue liquid, no soothing herbal teas sold with promises of balance and tranquility. There is linen if you're lucky, wool if you're desperate, and sometimes nothing at all, depending on your status supply or the month's laundry situation. The church says little on this particular topic. Too embarrassing, perhaps. Too womanly. Too real. Which leaves women like you to figure things out with a bit of trial, a bit of error, and a lot of quiet ingenuity. You wrap the linen between your legs, thread it through a makeshift girdle of twine or old belt, and knot it at your hip. It's not comfortable. It's not secure, but it'll do for now. You move gingerly through your chores, not because you're fragile, heaven knows you're not, but because every step reminds you of the soft, swelling ache low in your belly. You shovel ash from the hearth-knead dough that doesn't want to rise and fetch water with arms that feel just a bit too heavy today. It's not weakness, it's just you. Existing, working, managing, while bleeding. The thing is, menstruation in the medieval mindset isn't just biology, it's theology, a curious blend of old medicine and moral judgment. Doctors, those who could read Latin and hadn't touched a patient in years, declared that women needed to bleed, that it was natural, necessary, a way to purge the body of excess humors, especially that terribly moist, cold nature women were believed to possess. Too much blood, hysteria. Too little madness. Too regular, suspicious. Too irregular, also suspicious. You couldn't win. One scholar, writing more boldly than most, suggested that menstrual blood could be used in healing potions. Another warned it could ruin crops, cloud mirrors, or drive dogs mad. You decide not to tell the hound lying at your feet. He seems calm enough. And honestly, if your presence could wither a vineyard, you wouldn't be carrying water at dawn, would you? But here's the quirk of it all. In some corners of Europe, especially rural areas, women whispered old cures to one another. A clove of garlic worn at the waist to ease cramps. A poultice of crushed fennel wrapped in wool and tucked against the skin. A tea brewed from mint yarrow, or when nothing else grew nettles. You've tried them all. Some helped, some didn't. Some made you itch. But the practice of caring for yourself, of passing along these small herbal secrets, it felt like something close to power. Hidden power. Female knowledge that was neither written nor spoken too loudly. Just exchanged hand to hand like a pressed flower in an apron pocket. That perhaps is the strangest thing of all. That something so universal, so unremarkable in the biological sense, became cloaked in secrecy and shame. Women didn't write about it in diaries. Priests didn't preach about it from pulpits. Doctors, when they mentioned it, did so with words like corruption or defilement. And yet, every woman you know, old and young, has dealt with it, and still does. A quiet shared ritual passed down without ceremony, not because it isn't important, but because it must be done whether celebrated or not. You pause at the well, the bucket heavy in your arms, the rope rough in your palms. A sudden cramp tugs deep inside you, and you close your eyes. Breathe. There's no time to be dramatic. But you allow yourself one small moment, just a flicker, to wonder, why is something so common treated like a curse? There's an argument to be made that silence was its own form of survival. In a world where knowledge could be dangerous, and female knowledge even more so, keeping quiet about the workings of your own body may have been the safest route. And yet you also know that silence can fray the edges of understanding, can make a girl think she's the only one, until one day she's handed a bundle of folded linen and a knowing glance, and it all clicks into place. That's how it was for you, and how it will be for someone else someday. Another girl, another cycle, another whisper. You glance down at your hands, dusted with flour and ash, and maybe a little blood, and think not for the first time that being a woman in this time is like being a ledger. No one writes in, but everyone reads. They see your face, your duties, your posture, but not your thoughts, not your pain, and definitely not your period. Still here you are, doing it anyway, surviving. You press your hand to your lower back stretch and head toward the garden. There's thyme to cut and rain coming in the distance. And your linen, it needs boiling, again. You don't go to her door during the day. No one does. You wait until dusk softens the path behind the barley field, until the last clatter of spoons in the longhouse has quieted. Then you slip your shawl over your shoulders and walk slowly, as if you're only out to breathe the air. But you're not. You're going to see the one person who might help you feel a little less like you're unraveling from the inside. The old woman lives at the edge of the village, where the trees start whispering to each other, and the thatch on her roof is half moss, half intention. They don't call her a midwife anymore, not loudly. These days, she's just her or that one. But you know better. She's the keeper of herbs, the one who can tell peppermint from pennyroyal in the dark. And right now, your belly is a nest of knives. She sees you before you knock. Of course she does. Inside her little cottage is warm, in the way that only places with years of simmering secrets can be. A pot bubbles on the fire, though you couldn't say what's in it. Something green, something bitter, something that smells like damp hope. You sit, because she nods at the stool. That's how you know she'll help. No one talks during these visits, not really. You both understand the rules. You don't say pain, and she doesn't say cure. But your hands tremble when she gives you the bundle of soft-dried leaves wrapped in cloth that smells faintly of smoke and thyme. For cramps, she might say if anyone were listening. For the monthlies. For when the moon calls blood to the surface. You've heard stories about the plants women use mugwort to calm the womb, yarrow to slow the bleeding, rue, though some say that's more for ending things than easing them. That's the funny thing. The same herb might be a healer, a helper, or a quiet horror, depending on who's brewing and who's bleeding. You nod, slip the bundle into your pouch, and place 2 eggs on the table in thanks. She doesn't ask for coin, but you give what you can. The truth is, women have always carried this knowledge stitched into the seams of aprons, folded into the corners of kerchiefs, passed from hand to hand with a glance and a warning. It's not in any book. The monks don't write about it. The scholars don't copy it. The physicians. They're more likely to bleed you with leeches than hand you a chamomile poultice. And yet, the Herbal Whisper Network exists. You hear it by the well when someone mentions how fennel eases swelling, or when an aunt says quietly that tansy tea should never be taken too hot. It's not just about pain either. It's about control, a little power in a world where your body is often something you survive rather than inhabit. Still, not everyone agrees. Some say all this herb lore is just superstition, an excuse for old wives to meddle and gossip. Others argue it's real medicine passed down through lived experience long before the word clinical ever existed. And then there are those who whisper that too much knowledge can get a woman burned. You don't care what the scholars think. You care that this tea might let you sleep without curling into a knot. You care that someone knows what to do when the pain makes you dizzy. You care that even if no one talks about it during the daylight hours, there are still hands like hers, wrinkled steady kind, that pass down what no one dares write. You leave just as the stars begin to prick the sky. You don't say goodbye, but you look back once just to see if she's watching. She is. And she nods again, once, small enough. The pain is still there, of course. It always is. But now, so is the knowledge, folded in cloth, steeped in heat, carried quietly through centuries. The kind of history that never made it into scrolls, but lives on in steaming cups and whispered thanks. The smell hits you before you even open your eyes. It's sharp green, earthy, like crushed leaves, steeped in regret. Wormwood, tucked into your bodice, hung by your bed, rubbed on your wrists, like a prayer you can't speak out loud. You never liked the scent, but you've learned to live with it. Because in the world you live in, where bleeding is your monthly inheritance, and shame follows close behind, it's not the blood that frightens you most. It's the smell. Not just yours, the village's, the world's. There are days when the air hums with dung wood smoke sweat and something sour that sticks behind your teeth, and yet you still worry that you are the one who stinks. Because women aren't supposed to be noticeable, not in sound, not in scent. So you keep little bundles of wormwood and rosemary in your apron. You chew fennel seeds. You boil sage in rainwater and dab it behind your ears, hoping it masks the iron tang that no one admits they can smell. It's a quiet kind of desperation. You've heard of noblewomen placing lavender under their skirts and carrying pomanders around their necks, as if a silver ball filled with clove and myrrh can cancel out the body. But you've only got what grows wild near the sheep pens. Wormwood, bitter leaf, lady's cure, witch's ally, sin's perfume. You're not sure who first decided it could help. Maybe a healer, maybe a poet, maybe just someone desperate. You only know it's what the other women use too. You've seen them pretending not to glance at one another on market day, adjusting their shawls when a breeze hits wrong. You've watched them shift awkwardly on wooden benches, all too aware of sweat and scent, and the fear of being noticed. It's one of those strange little truths of medieval life. For all the talk of sin and salvation, sometimes all you really want is not to be smelled. You remember, once, a young girl, barely old enough to bleed, burst into tears when a boy teased her for smelling like copper and cabbage. She didn't speak for days after, and no one ever taught the boy why he was wrong, because no one talks about it. They just suggest herbs and move on. But you've read the signs in the gardens, the tucked away plants that grow only near women's homes. You've shared glances and silent offerings, a sprig of mint, a ribbon soaked in vinegar, a leaf pressed in a book of prayers. It's the unspoken hygiene of the medieval woman. Not bathed, perhaps, but not careless. Never careless. Washing is rare. Water must be fetched. Firelit privacy begged. So you manage scent another way. Herbs mostly. And sometimes even stranger things. You've heard whispers of women rubbing crushed garlic on their feet to draw the humors downward. Others swear by hanging camphor near the bed or placing marigold petals in their shoes. None of it makes much sense. But then again, neither does a world that blames you for a natural cycle while giving you no tools to manage it. There's a debate, of course always a debate. Modern historians argue whether medieval women were truly dirty by choice or simply constrained by their circumstances. Some say personal cleanliness was prized, just differently defined. That scent was about modesty, not freshness. Others argue women were shamed into self-erasure, made to smell like plants, so they wouldn't smell like people. And maybe they're both right. You don't think of it as shame, though. You think of it as strategy. Survival masked in rosemary. Dignity tucked under your chemise. Comfort carried in the bend of a lavender stalk. You go about your day with your wormwood pouch tied close to your skin. You pretend you can't feel the itching or the heat building between your thighs. You smile even when the cramps twist, because the scent matters, even if you're the only one who admits it. And when the breeze rises, you press your arms close and think not of flowers or sanctity, but of how hard it is to live in a body no one wants to name, and everyone wants to smell nothing of. You know deep down that if your body were allowed to speak, it wouldn't apologize. But since it can't, you do. With herbs, with silence, with wormwood and worry. The boys aren't told. That's the simplest way to put it. No one gathers them near the hearth and explains what a womb is, or why their sisters sometimes wince when lifting water buckets, or why the laundry line has occasional reddish stains that everyone pretends not to see. They're not taught, so they don't ask. And the girls? Well, they aren't told either. Not until it happens. Not until the ache starts low and deep. Not until they wake to a rust-colored patch in their shift, and the panic sets in, and suddenly the world seems heavier and less forgiving. That's when a woman, sometimes your mother, sometimes, not pulls you aside, speaks in hushed tones, uses words that don't make sense, but somehow explain everything. Not the why, of course. No one explains why. Just what to do, what not to touch, how to keep quiet. You're not to enter the bakehouse today. You shouldn't step too close to the brewer's casks. You mustn't hold the bread when it's fresh. Why they shrug, or they say it's not clean, or they look away. And you learn very quickly that this new part of your body is not for discussing, not in daylight, not in company, not with men, and certainly not with laughter. There are no books on it, no drawings, no lessons, no helpful diagrams sketched by moonlight. If you want to understand what's happening to you, you must do it with guesses, glances, and half-remembered sayings. Sometimes, it feels like you're piecing together a secret language passed through generations of women who weren't allowed to write it down. You remember your first time clearly. You thought you were dying, that you'd torn something inside, that you'd done something wrong. And the panic didn't fade when the women explained. It simply shifted. from fear of injury to fear of being noticed. From now on, everything would be different. You'd be watched more closely, judged more harshly, expected to carry yourself like someone who might one day carry children, even if you still felt like a child yourself. And still, no one told the boys. They go on playing with sticks, arguing about saints, and dreaming of armor. Meanwhile, you're counting how many cloths you have left and praying no one sees the one soaking in the wash basin. There's a strange irony to it all. The boys are never taught what to expect from a woman's body, but they'll grow up to govern it, to make the rules, to pass judgment. And the girls, who know the truth intimately, are taught to keep it quiet. There's an academic debate, of course. Some historians argue that menstrual education simply didn't exist, that silence was the norm across class and country. Others suggest that knowledge did pass down just differently, that medieval women learned from older relatives, wet nurses, or midwives, even if no formal talk occurred. But even in the best of cases, it was uneven, uncertain. If you were lucky, you had a mother who whispered it early, who gave you rags ahead of time and a soft look of understanding. If you weren't, you bled alone. You panicked. And then you learned very fast that this topic would not be kindly received in polite company. You'd hear other girls talk in code about the curse or the dark tide or simply that time, and you'd learn to nod along, to pass rags behind your back, to ask for vinegar or sage with a meaningful glance. The world didn't want you to speak of it, so you didn't. You just lived it. You grew older. The pain became predictable. The silence became habitual, and you began to do what they had done. Before you hushed instructions to younger girls, hurried warnings, advice disguised as small talk. And still, the boys weren't told. Even when they married, even when they shared beds with women who bled beside them and bore their children, you sometimes wonder if they ever truly learned at all. You doubt it, because if they had, maybe they would have built pews with cushions. Maybe they would have written books that explained the womb instead of fearing it. Maybe they would have listened when women said, "This hurts." But they didn't. And so you carry the knowledge, like a secret scroll, folded in linen passed from hand to hand, never inked in the pages that survive. They didn't teach the boys. And the girls, they weren't supposed to speak. But somehow, they always found a way to whisper. You reach for the bread, and someone clears their throat. Not loudly, not rudely, just enough. Enough for you to hesitate. Enough for your hand to falter mid-air and draw back like you've touched something too holy or too cursed. Because today, you're bleeding. And today, you're not supposed to touch the bread, not the dough, not the loaf, not even the rising bowl beneath the cloth. It's not that anyone says it outright, at least not where others can hear. It's just understood, like so many other things in your life. When your cycle begins, so too do the invisible boundaries. You feel them in the way the other women glance at you when you enter the bakehouse, the way your own mother passes you a task that involves firewood, not flour. You are for a few days considered different, not sick, not exactly unclean, but not clean either, and certainly not fit to handle sacred things. Bread in the medieval world is more than food. It is symbol and survival body and blessing. It is baked into the heart of the Mass and sits at the center of every household meal, which is why your bleeding body, so natural and yet so feared, is unwelcome in its making. The same goes for beer. You used to help stir the mash even as a girl, long before you started bleeding back, when you still wore your hair unbound and ran barefoot in the mud. But now your hands are watched. There's a superstition, several actually, that a menstruating woman will ruin the yeast, that the brew will go sour, that the foam will fall flat, and the ale will never ferment. And no one wants that. Beer isn't just drink, it's safer than water. It's nutrition. It's trade. It's part of the daily ration, even for children. And so, the moment your cycle begins, you are gently but firmly kept away. Some women don't mind. It means fewer chores, less time sweating over vats and ovens. But others like you feel it differently, like a shrinking, a dimming, as if your body is no longer your own, but a vessel carrying something the world mistrusts. You can still fetch water, still mend clothes, still scrub the floor, but you can't touch the bread. It's not a punishment, but it feels like one. There's no consistent rule book for this. Each village, each household, each generation does things a little differently. Some places take it lightly, others are stricter. You once heard of a woman in a nearby town who refused to stop baking even during her bleeding days. And when a loaf turned out burned, they blamed her, said her womb had cursed the oven. She stopped baking after that. There's a debate among scholars, of course there is. Some argue that these taboos were rooted in practicality, that in a pre-scientific world, people looked for any explanation for bad batches of bread or spoiled beer, and a woman's cycle was a convenient scapegoat. Others insist it was part of a broader system of control. Keep women away from holy things, from the symbols of sustenance and spirit, and you keep them silent. And then there are those who say women used these taboos to their own advantage, leaned into the rules to gain moments of rest in otherwise unrelenting lives. Maybe they're all a little bit right. You do sometimes appreciate the excuse to step back from the oven. The heat is relentless, the flour drying to dust on your hands, the work never ending. But still, when you step into the kitchen and feel eyes on you when you reach for the rising dough, and sense hesitation in the room, it stings. Because the bread doesn't care. The yeast doesn't know. Only the people do. And their beliefs shape your world. You adjust. You adapt. You hand the bowl to someone else. You stir the pot instead. You go outside and chop herbs, pretending that's what you meant to do all along. But in your mind, you count the days, not just for your own body's rhythm, but for when you'll be allowed again, allowed to touch, to knead, to brew, allowed to be trusted. And when that day comes, no one will say anything. No one will welcome you back. No one will note your return to the sacred circle of bread and beer. But you'll know. You'll press your hands into the dough with quiet reverence. You'll breathe in the yeasty tang of fermentation and feel just for a moment like your body is not an exile, but an instrument, a rhythm, a cycle, a sacred clock that's always ticking beneath the silence. And maybe next time you'll still hesitate. Or maybe you'll reach for the bread anyway, just to see who dares to stop you. It starts with a chill, not the kind that comes from the weather, but the kind that crawls up your spine when the village gets quiet in the wrong way, when the old women glance too long and the children are called inside too early, when a chicken dies for no reason, or the milk turns before dawn, or a man falls ill and no one knows why. That's when people start looking around and they notice you, or someone like you. A woman a little apart, a little too quiet or too loud, a little too barren or too fertile, a little too mysterious or too obviously bleeding. Because when something bad happens, it must have come from somewhere. And in medieval minds, few things were more suspicious than a body that bled by itself. No wound, no injury, just blood. Regular, rhythmic, mysterious. Natural, yes, but also unsettling. They say the devil looks for openings, cracks in the body, tears in the soul. And what is a menstruating woman, they wonder, if not a walking portal? You've heard the whispers. Everyone has. That during your monthly time, you're more vulnerable, more exposed, more likely to draw dark things near. Some even believe that your blood can attract demons, or worse, that it feeds them. It's not in the Bible exactly, but it doesn't need to be. The fear has already seeped into the mortar of the churches and the fire circles of the homes. It lingers in the stories passed down with tightening voices. A girl who bled too early and was said to talk to animals. A woman whose periods were irregular and whose husband died mysteriously. An old widow who sold herbal teas and had unclean cloths by the hearth. None of them lasted long. You try to shake off the thought, but it clings like damp linen in winter, because even if you know the truth, they might not care. They might still think you're too close to something wild, something wrong. There's a strange tension in all of this. On one hand, your blood is seen as powerful. On the other, it's seen as proof that you're closer to sin. And if power and sin overlap well, that's a woman's problem, isn't it? Some even believe menstrual blood can poison crops, wither flowers, or sour wine. You've certainly never tried. But the way the brewer watches you when you pass makes it clear he half believes it. The debate among scholars today is a careful one. Some argue that medieval fears around menstruation and demonic possession were overblown, exaggerated by later writers, or isolated to extreme cases. That most people simply saw periods as inconvenient, not infernal. Others disagree. They point to sermons, folk tales, and even trial records where menstruation is tied subtly or not to accusations of witchcraft, heresy, and impurity. You don't need the scholars to tell you. You've lived it. You've seen the way a woman's body can be twisted into evidence, not just of crime, but of cosmic offense. And yet here you are, still bleeding, still breathing, still stirring the pot and folding the cloth. You take precautions. You say your prayers. You wear your charm, a little silver circle tied to red thread hidden under your chemise. Not because you truly believe it will protect you, but because others believe it might. And that belief is often the most dangerous kind. You remember once, during a dry season, when the crops failed and the villagers grew tight-lipped with worry. A woman nearby, thin, sharp-tongued, childless, was found with bloodied cloths drying on her line. She didn't last the week. It wasn't an execution. Not officially, but it didn't need to be. She was left out of the conversations, out of the markets, out of the protection of the group. That's all it takes sometimes. Just a story, just a stain, just the wrong timing. And a perfectly ordinary part of your body becomes a reason for suspicion. You tuck the memory away. You wash your rags in the early light. You burn the herbs that promise balance and whisper the names of saints who never mention women like you. You endure because you know that your body is not possessed. It is possessed of strength, of rhythm, of knowledge, and yes, of blood. But not the devil's. just yours. And even if the world flinches at the sight of it, you've learned to stand still, to breathe through the chill, to stay warm in your own skin, even when others look away. You've gotten good at secrets, not the scandalous kind, nothing involving locked doors or stolen kisses, just the quiet, everyday secrets of being a woman who bleeds. Like how you fold your linen rags so the stains don't show when they dry. Or how you layer your skirts just right in case something leaks through. Or how you wash your underthings when no one's around, not because you're ashamed, but because you know how quickly shame can be assigned to you. Laundry is public. Periods aren't. And therein lies the problem. The wash must be done outside near the well or the stream. Water doesn't carry itself, and tubs don't hide easily. So when it comes time to rinse the cloths you've used during your cycle, you do it with care. You look around. You wait. You hope no one's watching, because a red stain on a drying line can lead to whispers, and whispers are dangerous. You've seen it happen. You once watched a neighbor's daughter hang her shift too early in the day, still damp, still blotched. A group of boys saw it and laughed. One even pointed. By dusk, the whole street was talking. Not about the boy, of course. About her. You learned that day to wash at dusk and hang at dawn. Even if it means damp linen under your mattress, steaming quietly through the night. It's not that you think your blood is wrong. You don't. But the world does. Or at least it acts like it does. Even though everyone knows it happens. Every woman, every month more or less. It's not a surprise. But it must be hidden like a sin you didn't choose. Some say it's about modesty. That women should be private, tidy, self-contained. That blood is messy and therefore inappropriate. Others say it's about purity, that sacred things, bread, beer, pews, prayers shouldn't be touched by bodies in flux. And then there's the simplest explanation. People are uncomfortable with what they don't control. And menstruation, your body's quiet, rhythmic defiance, isn't something anyone can schedule or silence. The cloths you use are stained, of course. They always are. No amount of scrubbing removes the color entirely. Not with cold water. Not with lye. Not with the sun's half-hearted bleaching. You try your best, but the ghost of it remains. Some women burn their used cloths rather than wash them. Others bury them, believing the earth will take what the air should not see. You don't have that luxury. You reuse. You rinse, soak, wring, and fold. And hope. The secrets aren't just yours. They're passed between women. Small tricks, careful gestures, warnings. Don't hang your cloth too near the fire. Men will notice. Don't scrub too hard in public. The stains will splash. Don't explain yourself. No one's listening anyway. There's a debate among scholars about how menstrual cloths were handled in the Middle Ages. Some argue that most women used rags regularly, cleaning and reusing them with quiet routine. Others believe that for poor women, especially laborers, managing menstruation meant little more than shifting how you sat and hoping your skirts caught most of it. There's even disagreement over whether rags were worn at all, because so few survive in the archaeological record. But then, of course, they don't. Who keeps blood-stained linen as an heirloom? The cloths rot, or they're burned, or they're thrown out with a handful of ashes and forgotten, which is why your daily rituals, the washing, the wringing, the hiding, are never written down. They don't survive in records. They survive in practice, in women who quietly taught other women where to hang the cloths and when to keep still. You never needed a book to tell you how to manage this part of your life. You needed a bucket, a bit of privacy, a sister who didn't ask questions, and maybe, if you're lucky, a breeze strong enough to dry the linen before the next round begins. So, you fold your rags with care, even if they're frayed at the edges and faded at the center. You carry them to the stream under your apron, greet the water like an old friend, and rinse away the proof that your body continues to do what it does. You don't resent it, but you do wish it wasn't such a secret. You wish your cloths didn't have to hide behind the petticoats and potato sacks. You wish the stains didn't feel like confessions. You wish people would stop pretending they don't know, because they do know. They've just chosen to forget out loud. Wool. Scratchy, itchy, too warm in the summer, and never quite warm enough in winter. But dependable. When you're bleeding, you reach for wool, not because you want to, but because it does what linen sometimes can't. It soaks. It stays. It doesn't shift quite so easily when you're bent over a churn or crouched in the garden pulling beets. You fold the strip carefully, thicken the center thinner at the ends, and tie it to the belt around your hips with a knot that you hope won't slip. The padding chafes your thighs. Your legs feel stiff-stuffed, like you're wearing a secret that makes every movement just slightly wrong. And you are wearing a secret. It rustles softly when you walk. You don't wear it under your best dress. Wool can leave stains that never quite come out, but it lives beneath your daily layers, close to the skin, soaking up what the world refuses to see. It's not just the material you wrap yourself in. It's the way you move through the world while wearing it. Carefully, quietly, always calculating. How long until I can change it? Do I have a clean one? Will anyone notice if I sit too long on the wooden stool? You sit gingerly, adjusting yourself with practiced subtlety. Your hands never rest. They smooth your skirts, press against your belly, tug at the waistband, check, recheck, and pretend not to. You've learned to walk differently during your cycle. A slower, more deliberate gait. Less bounce, more balance. You tell yourself it's grace, but it's worry. Worry wrapped in wool. And still, life goes on. There's butter to churn, a child to soothe, lentils to sort. No one says, rest today, you're bleeding, because that would require them to admit that you bleed at all. Instead, you endure. You carry water even when it feels like your own body is a leaking vessel. You smile at the neighbor even though the cramps are a dull roar under your ribs. You laugh at a joke you don't hear because you're focused on making sure no part of you leaks through your underlayers. And you wonder, does anyone else feel this way? Of course they do. You've seen the look in another woman's eyes across the market stall. That brief flicker of you too. That shared glance when a younger girl shifts uncomfortably and someone passes her a scrap of cloth without a word. It's a kind of sisterhood, but one built more on silence than song. There's a historical debate about just how common wool pads were. Some scholars suggest most women used layered linen folded again and again until it could hold what it needed to. Others point to wool coarser but more absorbent, and cheaper if you had access to sheep and the patience to process fleece. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Sort of. The truth is, nothing medieval worked well for this. You were always a little damp, always a little raw, always wondering if you should change the cloth now or try to make it last until the evening fire. Some women cut old tunics into strips Others used moss or straw in desperate times, nature's padding with consequences. Rashes, infections, splinters in places no one should ever have splinters. You've tried moss. Once, never again. So now it's wool, and worry, and layers, so many layers. Chemise, petticoat, gown, apron, and underneath it all, your woolen pad, tied and tucked, and slightly askew, no matter how often you adjust it. You don't complain. Not because it's comfortable, but because there's no point. Complaining doesn't change the bleeding. It just invites raised eyebrows and quiet judgment. So instead, you focus on the rhythm, the folding, the tying, the warming of cloths by the hearth before you put them on, just to make the first hour more bearable. You tell yourself it's manageable, that you're used to it, that it's just part of being a woman. But sometimes, when you're alone, you let yourself lie flat on your back and sigh into the ceiling and wish just once to be without it, to wear nothing but linen, to walk without padding, to sit without calculation. But then someone calls. A goat escapes. A child needs help. Dinner must be made. So you get up. You adjust. And you wrap yourself in wool again. Because there's no other choice. And maybe, just maybe, you're stronger than anyone realizes. Even if you feel like you're held together with nothing but knots and fabric and sheer will. You don't even notice at first. Just a few days late, that's all. It's not unusual sometimes the moon shifts. Sometimes the cold lingers longer than it should. Sometimes you forget which day it last started. But then a week passes. And another. And suddenly you're not just counting days. You're replaying them. Trying to remember when it last came, how heavy it was, if it seemed different. You lie awake at night and place your hands over your stomach like it holds the answer. But it doesn't. It only holds questions. You're not sure what you feel. Hope, dread, both. In the Middle Ages, your period is more than a monthly nuisance. It's a sign, a signal, a clock ticking away in the dark. And when it doesn't come, everything changes. If you're married, people start watching you. Not closely, quietly. That's worse. They watch how you move. Whether you drink the ale. Whether you lift heavy things. They whisper behind hands that smell of garlic and wood smoke. If you're unmarried, well, that's different. That's danger. Because a missed period in your case isn't a cause for celebration. It's a spark waiting for dry kindling. You could be accused of sin, of shame, of worse. And still, it might be nothing. A late cycle, a miscount, a harsh winter upsetting the balance of your humors. But once the doubt takes root, it spreads fast. You try to appear calm. You do your chores, take your herbs, pretend to sleep soundly. You smile at the baker, sweep the floor a little too thoroughly, talk a little too brightly, all while waiting for a sign, any sign, that your body is still following the rules. Because even if the pain is harsh, even if the cloths are stained and sore, your period means something important. It means you're not pregnant, or not barren, or not cursed, or not suspected. It means normal. And in a world where women's bodies are often judged louder than they are listened to, normal is precious. There's a superstition in your village that if you bleed late, you should walk backward 3 steps every night before bed. That it tricks the body into remembering its rhythm. You've tried it. Along with fennel seeds, hot broth, whispered prayers to Saint Margaret, and a strange suggestion involving boiled nettle and goat hair that you absolutely did not follow through on. You even once sat on a rock that a neighbor swore was good for restoring flow. It wasn't. There's no shortage of advice, and none of it reliable. You start thinking of possibilities. Maybe it's illness. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's divine punishment. Maybe your womb is drying, shrinking, withering like an untended garden. Maybe it's just tired. Maybe you're just tired, and still no blood. The old women say that missing a period too often makes you heavy with poison. That blood must be let, or it will rot your insides. You try not to think about that. You chew on a twig of parsley and pretend it helps. There's a deeper fear, the one you don't speak aloud. What if it never comes back? What if you've crossed some invisible threshold? Because in medieval times, fertility isn't just biology, it's identity currency justification. You are expected to bear children. That is quite literally your job in the eyes of many. So when your body stops playing along early, late, or permanently, it changes your status, your value, and perhaps worst of all, how people look at you. There's an academic debate about how medieval society viewed menstruation's absence. Some historians say it was feared associated with imbalance illness or even demonic possession. Others argue that it was simply seen as a sign of pregnancy or the natural approach of menopause and treated with quiet pragmatism. But quiet pragmatism doesn't make your heart race any slower at night, because whether people respond with scorn or sympathy, the outcome is the same. You are watched, and you feel it. You miss the relief of the usual routine, the folding of cloths, the ache in your hips, even the scent of wormwood. You miss the certainty of it, the order, this limbo, this waiting, this absence. It feels louder than the pain ever did. And then, one morning, you wake shift in your sleep and feel it. That unmistakable warmth, damp and real. You exhale slowly. You don't move at first. You simply lie there, wrapped in a strange mix of relief and disappointment and a kind of quiet grief you hadn't known was building. It's back. And with it, the pain, the cloths, the rules, the hiding, but also the safety. You sit up, you dress, you fold your scrap of wool and tie it in place. You move about your day as if nothing happened. No one notices. No one knows the nights you spent calculating, the dreams you had, the fears that looped behind your eyes when the world went still. But you know. And so you tuck that knowledge into your apron pocket alongside your herbs and your chores and your silence. Because in this world, your womb is both a mystery and a measuring stick. And each month that it bleeds, you are reminded you are still part of the rhythm, still included, still predictable. For now, you wake up one morning and realize it's been a while, longer than usual. No aching belly, no damp warmth, no need to reach for the folded cloth you keep tucked behind the onions. At first, it feels like a gift. A few extra days of freedom, of dryness, of moving through the world without that careful awareness between your legs. But then the days stretch into weeks, and the weeks into months, and you begin to suspect the truth. The changes have begun. No one calls it that directly, of course. They have other names. The drying, the closing, the quieting, all of them whispered, half respected, half feared, spoken with the same hushed reverence one might use for a curse or a prophecy. You've heard the older women talk about it, usually behind their hands, sometimes behind your back, She's not bled in months. She's moving into the shift. She's becoming a crone. The last one always makes you pause, because it's not said kindly. It's not meant to describe wisdom, or freedom, or peace. It's meant to describe something ending, something being lost, your status, your usefulness, your mystery. You used to bleed, and now you don't. And that makes people nervous, because a woman who bleeds is at least understood, if not respected. She is seen as part of the system, motherhood pain fertility control. A woman who doesn't, she's outside the rhythm. She answers to no one. She is less useful and more dangerous. You feel it in the way people start treating you. You're still expected to do the work, stoke the fire patch, the roof, hold the baby when the young mother needs to wash. But there's a new tension beneath the surface. The women look at you with a strange mixture of sympathy and suspicion. The men don't look at you much at all. You've become invisible, and somehow more visible than ever. You miss the regularity of the cycle, the reassurance that your body was following its ancient map. Now you just feel uncertain. Your joints ache in new ways. Your sleep is lighter. You sweat when the night is cold and shiver when the sun is high. And then there's the bleeding, because it doesn't stop cleanly. It starts, stops, pauses, surprises you when you least expect it. 1 month nothing, the next a flood. You think it's over, and then wake to find yourself soaked, humiliated, your bedding stained like a warning. The cloths no longer fit right. The cramps return with different rules. You're not sure what your body is doing anymore. It's like living with a stranger who wears your face. There's a root. You chew black cohosh, they call it. It's supposed to help with the heat, the mood, the blood that won't make up its mind. You chew it anyway, though you're not sure it does anything but make your mouth feel like ash. The midwife offers you a blend of sage and elderflower. You try it. You hope. You wonder. And still, the changes come. There's an academic debate, of course. Some scholars believe menopause was barely noticed in medieval life, overshadowed by childbirth disease and mortality. After all, many women didn't live long enough to reach it. Others argue the opposite, that it was deeply significant, even feared. That a woman beyond childbearing years held a strange and threatening power, a body no longer tied to predictable cycles, a womb no longer useful, a life that couldn't be easily explained. There are records of women accused of witchcraft after the bleeding stopped. Coincidence, maybe, or maybe it was just easier to point fingers at women whose bodies had changed in ways no one wanted to understand. You try not to think about that. Instead, you light a candle in the evening and sit by the hearth hands, folded watching the flames. You listen to the younger girls whisper about belly pain and folding cloths. You offer advice only when asked. You don't miss the blood exactly, but you do miss the belonging, the shared rhythm, the understanding nods, the quiet glances that said me too. Now you're alone in a different way, not shunned, but shifted. You remember your own mother, sitting just like this near the end of her days. You never asked her how it felt. You wish you had. Because now that your body is quieting, you realize it wasn't just blood that connected you to the other women. It was the knowing. And when the blood fades, so does that thread. You are not young anymore. But you are not done. There is life beyond the bleeding. A different kind, a deeper kind. One that doesn't require secrecy or cloth or explanations. You begin to wonder, what will you do with this new version of yourself? This woman who doesn't bleed but still breathes, who doesn't belong to the cycle but remembers every turn of it. Maybe this is its own kind of power, not the power of fertility or fire or youth, but the power of having survived it. Every ache, every cloth, every fear of being seen, you sit a little straighter. The candle flickers, and somewhere inside you, something else begins to burn. Not blood, but memory. And that may be the fiercest rhythm of all. You're not fine, but you act like you are. Because in the quiet rules of medieval life, pretending is its own kind of survival, especially when you're bleeding. You wake with that familiar dull ache curling in your lower belly, a heaviness like wet wool soaked in the cold river and tied tight across your hips. But you smile anyway. You stir the pot braid, the child's hair, nod at your neighbor. You don't let on that every step feels like a punishment, that your legs are sticky, your back is sore, and your mind is already counting how many clean cloths you have left, because the moment you let it show, someone will notice. And that can be worse than the pain itself. You were taught early, don't mention it. Don't wince. Don't pause. Don't make a face when you sit down. If you leak, keep moving. If you cramp, keep stirring. Pain is part of life, they say, and your pain. Especially this kind, it's expected. It's ordinary. It's nothing, which is why it's so hard to talk about and so easy to ignore. You remember once as a girl, asking your aunt why she always pressed her hand to her side and walked slowly when she thought no one was watching. She smiled tired kind but distant and said, "Sometimes it's better not to let them see." You didn't understand it then. You do now. Because the truth is, your body is doing something intense, something powerful, something inconvenient, and no one really wants to hear about it. Not the men, not the priest, sometimes not even the other women. Everyone has pain, you're told. Everyone is tired. Everyone struggles. So what makes yours special? You learn to tuck it away. There's no medieval word for self-care. No permission to rest during your cycle. No doctor's note to excuse you from market day or laundry. You just go on. And even when it hurts so badly, you can't breathe deeply, you find a way to appear normal. That's the art of it. You don't have to be fine. You just have to look like you are. And that performance becomes habit. You develop little tricks, standing still. When the cramps surge, eyes focused on the floor until it passes. Rolling your shoulders instead of sighing when the fatigue hits. Taking the long route through the field so you can walk, bent over, without anyone seeing. No one claps for this. There are no gold coins, no scrolls written in your honor. Just another day survived. The odd thing is, there's a strange pride in it too. You notice it in the older women, how they nod subtly when they see you working through the worst of it, how they pass you a fresh cloth without a word when your step falters. It's not sympathy, not exactly. It's recognition. A quiet salute to the unspoken endurance you both share. Still, you wonder what it might feel like to be honest. To wake up, clutch your belly, and say, "Today I can't." To lie down by the fire with a warm brick on your stomach and not be judged. To be allowed to be soft, to be slow to bleed without pretending. But the world you live in wasn't built for that. It was built for work, for duty, for surviving not feeling. There's a debate among modern historians. Did medieval women suffer more because of menstrual pain? Or were they simply tougher? Some argue they were conditioned not to notice it. That when life is already filled with bruises and blisters, another ache is just background noise. Others believe the pain was profound and constant, just buried beneath a culture that refused to name it. You think both might be true, because it does hurt, deeply sometimes. But you've also built a life on enduring it. You've found ways to move through the world without screaming. Ways to hide the ache, the leak, the fear of staining the stool. Ways to smile and work and nod and rise, and never once say what your body is really doing. Pretending is tiring, but it's less risky than being honest. Because being honest would mean asking for help. And asking for help could mean rejection, ridicule, or worse, being seen as weak. So you keep the mask on, a soft one, familiar. You still hum while you cook. Still pat the child's shoulder. Still answer the call to prayer. And inside, you count the hours until this round ends, until the bleeding slows, until the weight lifts, until the next time, because it will come again. It always does. And you'll do what you've always done. You'll fold the cloth, breathe through the pain, smile when you feel like wincing. You'll master the art of pretending again, not because you want to, but because pretending is the only way anyone ever listens. And you've learned how to speak without speaking, how to cry without sound, how to live in a body that hurts and still serve the soup. That too is an art, even if no one ever hangs it on the wall. Cloisters are supposed to be places of silence, stillness, order, and yet, even here, your body doesn't listen. The prayers are regular. The bells toll with precision. The hours of the divine office rise and fall like breath. But your womb follows a different rhythm, a rhythm that no amount of chanting can quiet. You kneel at Matins' hands, folded eyes lifted, and there it is again. The warm shift, the sudden wetness, the creeping fear that the linen isn't enough this time. You bow your head, not just to God, but to gravity. You rise slowly, carefully clutching your habit where it meets your waist. In the cloister, no one talks about it, not directly. There are rules for nearly everything: when to eat, when to speak, how to wash, how to pray, how to walk, how to breathe. But the rules about bleeding, they're hidden in footnotes, if they exist at all. Because in theory, you're not supposed to be a body here. You're a soul, a vessel for devotion, an instrument for prayer, a daughter of God, not a woman with cramps and stained wool tied beneath her habit. But of course you are. All the nuns are. The younger ones shift uncomfortably on the wooden benches during lauds. The older ones sigh, more often press fingers to their temples, grip the lectern just a little tighter when the pain comes in waves. And yet, no one speaks of it. No one needs to. You've learned to read the signs. The slightly slower gait, the extra candle lit by the infirmary door, the faint scent of rosemary steeping in the warming room, left by a sister who couldn't sleep. There are whispered arrangements, cloths folded and exchanged in silence. Herbal teas passed in pewter cups without a word. A nod from Sister Agnes when she sees you falter during the reading. You're not alone, but you must behave as if you are, because the cloister is sacred, pure, removed from the flesh of the world. Except, of course, it's not. It's full of flesh, of aches and blood and bone and breath. The walls may be stone, but the women inside are soft and bleeding, and often afraid to say so. You once asked the infirmarian if there were special instructions for this part of life. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Keep clean, Be discreet. That was all. No more guidance. No more comfort. As if discreet were a balm. As if silence were antiseptic. There's a scholarly argument, as always. Some historians claim that nunneries had systems for managing menstruation, special cloths, scheduled bathing, separate sleeping arrangements during heavy days. Others argue there was little organization at all, that women simply endured it as they endured everything else, cloaked in prayer and covered in wool. There are few written records. Why would there be? The monks didn't copy scrolls about female cycles. The priests didn't write letters about cramps. So what remains is suggestion, impression, glimpses of folded cloths in inventories, mentions of necessary herbs in garden records, a single note in one abbey's ledger linen for the sisters' use monthly. That's all. But you know what that line means. You've lived it. The days when the blood comes so fast, you change your cloth twice between sext and nun. The nights when you wake in the dormitory and sneak barefoot to the water basin with a bundle wrapped under your arm. You wash in darkness. You pray as you scrub, not for relief, but for quiet. For the stain to come out. For no one to notice. You dry your cloth by the fire before anyone else wakes. You fold it and tuck it beneath your sleeping mat. You pretend nothing is wrong. And then you go to prime. And you sing, with a belly that aches, and legs that tremble, and a mouth that forms every Latin syllable as though your body weren't at war with itself. That is the cloister's strange demand to bleed without being seen, to suffer without disturbing the rhythm of the psalms. You sometimes envy the old abbess. Past her bleeding years, her body has fallen silent in that particular way. She walks calmly, speaks gently, eats slowly. Her body no longer interrupts her devotions. But once she caught you limping in the cloister walk, she said nothing at first, just stood beside you, both of you, gazing at the frost gathering on the windowsill. Then softly she said, "It gets easier." You didn't ask what she meant. You didn't need to. Because here, that's the most anyone will say. No sermons on womanhood. No lectures on cycles. Just passing wisdom between matins and mealtime. You wonder sometimes if God minds. If he notices when you kneel awkwardly because your hips are sore. If he hears the unspoken part of your prayers, the ones whispered not with words, but with clenched jaws and steady hands and silent tears. You like to think he does. Because surely a God who made your body this way knows what it endures. Even if the world you live in would prefer not to acknowledge it. So you pray, and you bleed, and you change the cloth again. You chant, and you ache, and you bow your head. And beneath the habit, beneath the silence, beneath the rules, you remain, defiantly quietly, a woman. You don't know where it went. It was there this morning, folded neatly under your sleeping mat with the others. You always keep them together, washed, dried, tucked with care in the same worn spot between your spare apron and the broken comb you've had since girlhood. But now, gone. The cloth is simply not there. You check again, more slowly this time, as if touching the empty space might make it reappear. You lift the apron, feel beneath the mat, glance behind the chest. Still nothing. Your stomach twists, not just from the usual ache, but from something colder, heavier, a kind of fear that's all too familiar. Because a missing cloth doesn't just mean inconvenience, it means exposure. It means someone might find it. And if they do, what then? You hope it was swept up by accident. That someone mistook it for a rag and tossed it into the basket near the hearth. That maybe just Maybe it's sitting in the laundry pile unnoticed. But hope is a soft and unreliable thing. And your mind, shaped by years of living in a body no one wants to talk about, starts racing ahead. What if someone sees the stain? What if a child picks it up and runs laughing through the street? What if the wrong person, someone stern, someone self-righteous, holds it between two fingers like it's filth and asks, "Who does this belong to?" You breathe slowly. Sit on the edge of the bed. Listen to the distant sounds of the courtyard footsteps, chickens the creak of a cart. Everything is normal, except it's not. You don't know what makes you more anxious, that someone might find it, or that no one will, and it will simply vanish into the world, taking with it a trace of your most private self. There's a strange intimacy to those cloths. They are your monthly companions, witnesses to your cycles, your pain, your survival. You've stained them, washed them, bled through them, whispered to them like old friends. They've absorbed parts of you that no one else sees, and now one is gone. There's a historical curiosity here, a gap in the record that scholars love to mention. Where are the menstrual cloths? We have inventories of linens, veils, tunics. We have lists of items passed from mother to daughter, nun to novice, midwife to bride. But the rags women used every month, almost none survive. They were burned, buried, composted, forgotten, or more likely, they were never considered worth preserving in the first place. Because who would keep such a thing? Who would hold onto a square of stained cloth and say this mattered? And yet it did. You know it did. Because when one disappears, your whole world shifts a little. You move through the day, distracted your thoughts, always drifting back to that missing scrap of fabric. You check corners, under benches, near the water basin. Nothing. It's as if the earth swallowed it. Or history did. You speak to no one. Not because you don't want help, but because there's no way to ask. What would you even say? Have you seen my bleeding cloth? Did I leave my shame near the firewood? Has anyone noticed a sign of my womanhood lying around? Of course not. So you carry the silence like a second apron. You make do with your remaining cloths, washing more often, drying them by the fire, hoping no one asks why you're up earlier than usual, or why your hands are red from scrubbing. And you start to wonder, how many women has this happened to? How many lost cloths? How many moments of panic? How many women stood in kitchens or cloisters or cowsheds and felt that same drop in the gut when a scrap of linen disappeared? There's a small story in a 14th century letter, rare and barely legible, where a servant girl was dismissed for unclean fabric left in the laundry. The detail is brief, but it says everything. It tells you the cloth was found, and that the punishment came swiftly. You wonder if that girl ever found the words to explain herself, or if she just nodded ashamed and walked away. You try not to let your mind go there, but it does. Because a missing cloth is never just missing. It is a threat, a warning, a reminder that your privacy is paper thin. So you begin keeping your cloths closer, tucked deeper, wrapped tighter. You stitch tiny marks into the corner of each, just a thread of red or blue like a secret signature. You wash them alone. Dry them under your apron if you have to. Because if no one else is going to protect these pieces of you, you will. And when the blood comes again, as it always does, you'll use the one with the faded corner, the one you've had the longest. You'll fold it just right, tie it to your waist, and pretend not to notice how your hands still tremble from that lost morning. And maybe someday, someone will find a cloth like yours, buried beneath floorboards, stained and forgotten. Maybe they'll wonder about the woman who used it. Maybe they'll think she was careless or secretive or ashamed. But maybe, just maybe, they'll understand that she wasn't hiding something shameful. She was protecting something sacred, something no one else ever thought to keep. You hold the cup to your lips and wince. It smells like boiled bark and regret. Tastes worse, but you drink it anyway, because the pain in your belly won't leave on its own. And this is what the midwife gave you, wrapped in linen, tied with string, passed in silence like a secret too powerful for daylight. She called it a remedy. You're not so sure. It's hot, bitter, and oddly gritty, as if the roots weren't strained properly. Still, you swallow it all, because in the Middle Ages, pain is rarely met with comfort. It's met with concoctions and hope and a deep, ancient belief that what grows from the ground must surely know how to fix what's broken inside you. This one has ash bark, you're told, an elderflower, a pinch of vinegar, a drop of sheep's milk for balance, and something else she didn't say what. You didn't ask. Because asking too many questions about women's medicine can get you strange looks, especially if what you're treating is a body that bleeds, the so-called monthly curse. Some remedies are meant to ease the bleeding. Others are meant to stop it. Still others claim to bring it forth when it's late. You've tried all three at one point or another. There was the time you chewed dried rue for days, hoping to delay the cycle during a long journey. You bled anyway, half a day into the trip. There was the powder. A traveling seller offered ground beetle shells and red ochre. You didn't try that one. It looked more like paint than healing. And then there was the time a friend gave you a cloth soaked in vinegar and mustard seed. You held it against your belly as instructed. It burned. You thanked her anyway, because what else do you do when pain meets myth, and all you can do is choose which version of suffering to try? There's no shortage of advice. Boil angelica in wine. Tie marjoram around your waist. Rub nettle juice on your thighs. Drink mint tea only after moonrise. Avoid onions. Seek rosemary. Fear sage unless blessed first. And whatever you do, they say, never mix yarrow with hawthorn. That way lies madness. You wonder how anyone keeps track. But they do. The old women especially. They remember every combination, every ratio, every story of the girl who tried this or that and ended up cured or worse. It's not science. Not exactly. It's memory. It's pattern. It's survival. And yes, it's superstition. But when your body feels like it's twisting itself into knots, you'll try almost anything. Even the honey and vinegar poultice. Even the boiled leeks. Even the chalky pills made of dried mouse droppings crushed and baked into tiny discs. Something your grandmother once claimed had worked in her day. You passed on that one. But not because you didn't believe her. Just because the thought of it made your stomach turn faster than the cramps did. There's an academic debate, of course. Some historians claim these medieval cures were nothing more than old wives' tales, ineffective at best, dangerous at worst. Others argue they were based on centuries of careful observation, passed from woman to woman, with as much rigor as any university text. And there's some truth to both. For every useless charm, there's an herb with real properties, feverfew, for instance, or valerian. Some of the teas might have soothed muscles. Some of the tinctures might have eased inflammation. But most were simply ritual, a way to do something, because doing nothing feels like surrender. And women, for all their silence, rarely surrender without at least trying to fight in their own quiet way. You're not a healer. You're not a scholar. You're not even sure half the things you've brewed have done anything but make your mouth pucker. But you are a woman who bleeds. And so, like every woman before you, you learn the recipes. You keep bundles of dried leaves tucked behind your mattress. You scrawl notes with bits of charcoal on the back of broken pottery. You remember. Because someday, someone younger will ask, and you'll need something to give her, besides a sympathetic look and a folded cloth. You'll want to offer more, even if it's just a warm drink, bitter and strange, that smells like bark and feels like hope. So tonight you sit by the fire with your cup and your pain, and you sip slowly, and you listen to the wind outside. You think of all the women doing the same thing across fields, across centuries, drinking strange teas, burning strange herbs, praying strange prayers, and waiting for the ache to pass. Because that's what this is in the end, not just a remedy, not just a myth, but a ritual, a rhythm, a way of saying I am still here. I am still enduring. Even if no one ever believed this potion worked, it worked in one way. It gave you a sense of control, a sense of doing something, anything in a world that so often asked you to bear pain in silence. And tonight, that's enough. You finish your tea. You place the cup near the fire. You fold your hands over your belly, and you breathe. Because the blood may come, or it may not. But you have your herbs, your memory, your stubborn, aching body, and all the myths that held it up when no one else did. You carry your towel like it's a shield. Folded neatly tucked under your arm, it hides the small bundle of linen you hope no one notices. The bathhouse door creaks as you step in. Warm air greets you, steamy thick, tinged with wood smoke and rosemary. The chatter of other women floats through the mist, soft and echoing. You nod to the attendant. She barely glances up. This is your bathing day, and you're bleeding. Perfect timing. The bathhouse is public, of course, like everything else. You share the space with neighbors, strangers, sometimes even the wife of the reeve. You wash alongside the same women who sit near you in church, who see your laundry line, who know exactly when your monthly rhythm changes, whether you say anything or not. But no one talks about it. Not here. Especially not here. You slip behind the wooden partition and undress carefully, your hands practiced. You keep your back to the others. You fold your chemise, just so. You check your cloth, tied in place, still dry. For now. You lower yourself into the water, slowly, grateful for the heat. It's not hot, not like a cauldron, just warm enough to ease the ache in your lower back. You close your eyes for a moment, just a moment. Then someone splashes nearby, and your body stiffens again. You're hyper-aware of the water, the movement, the faint cloudy streaks left by soap. You check the cloth again subtly. Is it holding? Because the fear isn't that you'll bleed. It's that someone else will see it. Even among women, even here, the idea of bleeding into shared water is a kind of unspoken horror. Not because it's unnatural, but because it breaks the illusion. The illusion that everyone's body is silent, clean, manageable. And yours? Yours is not today. There's a quiet debate happening in the bathhouse that no one voices. Some believe bleeding women shouldn't bathe, that it's unclean, that the water carries things it shouldn't, that the smell might linger or the blood might call forth something dark. Others argue the opposite, that bathing is especially important during your cycle, that warm water soothes, that rosemary or lavender clears the air, that a clean cloth on clean skin is its own kind of grace. You don't know who's right. You just know that the bathhouse is both relief and risk. You scrub yourself carefully. Armpits, neck, behind the ears, between the toes. You avoid your lower belly just in case. Some women rinse everything cloth and all. Others don't. You've heard of women sneaking herbs into the bath yarrow to stop the flow sage to bring it on chamomile to calm it all together. One woman was once scolded for leaving tea leaves in the water. Now, no one speaks of it. But the scent gives them away. You spot Sister Magda across the room, her hair-damp face flushed. She always bathes late in the cycle, you've noticed. Never before, never during, never the risk. The older women stay longer in the water. Their bleeding years are over their bodies, no longer part of this monthly tightrope. They sit back and chat about onions and wool prices, their knees poking above the surface, their shoulders loose. You envy them a little. You remember the story of the woman who bled into the bath just once and was never quite treated the same after. No one said anything to her face, but after that day, there was always a gap around her, a slight pause in conversation when she entered, a hesitation when sharing cups or combs. Just one moment, one bloom of red in the water. That's all it took. You finish quickly. You don't linger. You step out and wrap yourself in your towel. You dry your legs first, always the legs, then your arms. You check the cloth again before redressing, still holding. You feel like you've survived something, and you have. Because bathing during your cycle isn't just hygiene. It's choreography, a dance of concealment, a ritual of maintenance, a performance of being ordinary when your body insists on being anything but. There's a scholarly argument about how often medieval women actually bathed. Some claim cleanliness was rare, water-scarce modesty prized. Others insist bathhouses were more common than we think, especially in towns and cities. That bathing was a social affair, not just functional. Both are probably right. It depended on the region, the season, the wealth, the access to firewood, the rules of the church, which often warned against public nudity while quietly tolerating it. What's certain is this: for a bleeding woman, bathing was never simple. You wanted to be clean, but not noticed. Refreshed, but not marked. Part of the community, but not the reason someone left early. So you do what you always do. You manage. You adjust. You survive. You walk home with damp hair tucked beneath your scarf and your cloth freshly tied. You feel warmer, lighter, cleaner, and still a little tense, because the bath is over, but the bleeding isn't. You'll change again before bed. Fold the stained cloth. Whisper a small prayer that it doesn't slip in the night. And maybe in 3 weeks, the timing will be better. Maybe you'll bathe freely next time. Maybe. But even if not, you'll return. Because a body, even a bleeding one, deserves water, deserves warmth, deserves to be treated not as shameful, but as human. And in this medieval world that often pretends otherwise, that's a small act of quiet rebellion. You take it, you carry it, you go home clean and bleeding and ready to do it all again. She knows. Of course she knows. The midwife has seen more blood than most men in armor. But she won't say anything, not directly. Not when you shift uncomfortably on the stool near the hearth. Not when your face tightens just slightly as you peel potatoes. Not even when she hands you a folded scrap of linen without looking you in the eye. She just knows. And she knows you know that she knows. That's how it works. She's the quiet authority on all things unspeakable: childbirth, sickness, endings, beginnings, and bleeding, especially bleeding. She was likely the first woman to whisper to you when it started. Maybe even the one who handed you your very first cloth. She's the one you go to when the cramps won't stop, when the blood won't come, or when it comes too much. But still, she never calls it by name. No one does. You once asked her why. You were 14 maybe, and tired of calling it my days, or the time, or the tide. You wanted a word, a real one. She gave you a long look, then said, "We name things when we want men to understand them." And that was all. You've thought about that ever since, because she was right. The midwife doesn't need a word. She speaks in glances, in gestures, in what she gives you when you come to her doorstep without needing to explain yourself. A warm tea, bitter with mugwort, a cloth soaked in cooled vinegar, a hand on your shoulder while she says, "It passes." She has herbs for when it's late, herbs for when it's early, herbs for when it won't stop, herbs for when it won't start. She never brags, never names the leaves, never boasts about the time she stopped a girl from bleeding herself to death, though you've heard that story from others. She just shrugs and moves on. In a world where women's bodies are treated like mysteries wrapped in shame, the midwife doesn't flinch. She just carries on. She is often accused of knowing too much. Some call her dangerous, not openly, but in whispers, because knowledge, especially the kind that isn't written, that isn't sanctioned, that lives only in the minds and fingers of women, is threatening. Even now, as you sit across from her, cradling the heat of her strange tea in your palms, you feel the weight of what she doesn't say. You told her your cycle was late. You didn't tell her how afraid you were, or how you cried behind the hayrack last night. You didn't need to. She poured the tea before you could speak. There's a reason midwives often live on the edge of town. Not quite in the village, not quite outside, a space that matches the liminal world they inhabit between life and death, between silence and knowing, between medicine and myth. She's respected, feared too. People thank her with pies and firewood, but cross themselves when she walks past. She delivers babies, but she's also seen women die. She eases pain, but she's also whispered secrets into the night that no one wants to admit were heard. And still, when it comes to menstruation, she says the least. Because even she knows it's something sacred and fragile and feared. There's a scholarly curiosity about women like her. Academics today try to reconstruct the knowledge she held, what herbs she used, what techniques she practiced, what cultural rituals she followed. But most of it wasn't written down. Why would it be? Monks didn't ask midwives for their recipes. Physicians didn't credit women for what they knew. And midwives themselves rarely taught with ink and parchment. They taught with hands, with time, with watching. So now historians piece it together from fragments, a mention of mugwort in a garden ledger, a fine paid to a midwife who practiced healing without license, a charm sewn into a linen belt found in a peat bog. But the real archive lives in scenes like this, in you, sitting by the fire, not asking questions, in her handing you a warm cloth, not giving answers, just passing knowledge like breath. She knows when to say nothing, She also knows when to say exactly one sentence, like now. She watches you sip the tea and finally says, "If it's meant to come, it will." Then goes back to peeling apples. No alarm, no judgment, no sermon. She trusts your body, and you trust her trust. It's more comfort than anything else has been in weeks. You finish the tea, place the cup near the fire. Stand up slowly. She hands you a bundle of cloth, fresh folded, already warm. You don't need to ask. You nod. She nods back. And that's the whole conversation. You walk home with the bundle cradled like something holy. Because in a way, it is. She won't speak of your bleeding. Not to you. Not to anyone. But she knows. And that's more than enough. Because some knowledge isn't meant to be declared. It's meant to be carried quietly, steadily through the ages, from woman to woman, one cloth at a time. You tie the red thread around your ankle just before dawn, not tightly, just enough so it stays put as you move. You don't remember when you started doing it, only that someone older showed you how, and someone older had shown her, and so on. No one ever calls it a cure, but everyone agrees it helps. You've tried other things, of course. Herbs and teas, warm stones, sleep. But this little loop of dyed thread, red as rust, soft as wool, this stays with you. Some say it's to keep the womb closed. Some say it's to keep the flow steady. Some say it wards off spirits. No one really knows, but you keep doing it. Because sometimes superstition feels like protection. And when your body is leaking, cramping, aching, and everyone around you pretends not to notice a thread around your ankle is the closest thing you have to comfort. It's not just the thread, it's the salt you pinch over your left shoulder before washing your cloth. The way you never look directly at the moon when the pain is bad. The sprig of rue tucked behind the doorframe. The way you cross yourself twice on days when the blood won't stop. Little rituals, small gestures, habits grown into beliefs. You don't know if they work, but you don't dare stop. Your grandmother swore by sleeping with a silver coin under her pillow. Your mother whispered that if you speak of your cramps out loud, they'll double. Your cousin tried tying a string around her finger instead of her ankle. She bled for 9 days straight, never tried it again. Everyone has a story. No one writes them down. They're passed in kitchens and gardens, near basins, and beds murmured while fingers move, chopping herbs, folding cloths, braiding hair. The men don't hear them, or if they do, they scoff, which is fine, because the stories aren't for them. They're for you, for women like you, who bleed in silence, who endure without instruction, who find power in patterns. There's a peculiar comfort in the logic of these rituals. You don't control when the bleeding starts, or how much it takes from you, or when it will return. But you can tie a thread, you can say a prayer, you can throw the first cloth into the fire instead of the wash, as some do, to keep the heaviness from lingering. It's not about proof, it's about peace. There's a debate among scholars, of course. Some argue that these superstitions were tools of control, ways to keep women obedient, passive, fearful. Others see them as autonomy, a hidden language, a system of meaning women built for themselves when no one else would give them one. You don't know which is true, maybe both, but you do know this. When you wake with the familiar pull low in your belly, and the thread is still there, snug and red and humming against your skin, you feel a little less alone. You touch it absent-mindedly throughout the day. When you stir the stew, when you kneel in the chapel, when you sit carefully on the stool by the loom. The thread reminds you that other women have bled before you, that someone somewhere tied hers the same way this morning, that you're part of something messy, mysterious, older than saints, older than scrolls, older than the church itself, and yet still here, still binding, still yours. There's a tale in your village about a woman who forgot her thread and bled through all her cloths in one day. Her husband found the stains, left her. The story isn't true probably, but it's told as a warning. Tie the thread, protect the cycle, respect the blood, and if the thread falls off, you burn it. Quietly, alone. You don't keep a used red thread. That would be asking for trouble. There are other superstitions too. Some say, don't cook lentils on your first day. Some say, hang your stained cloth in the east-facing window for the wind to carry the pain away. Some say, wear only black wool during your cycle. You try what feels right. Ignore what doesn't. You never speak of these things outside the circle of women. Not even to the priest, especially not to the priest, because these are not sins. They are survivals. And some things don't need confession. They need remembering. So when you pass a young girl in the field, her walk stiff, her eyes lowered, you don't ask. You just glance at her ankle, see the red thread there, and you nod, because that's all it takes. No words, no teaching, just a thread, and the quiet knowledge it carries, that you are not the first. You are not alone. You are part of a lineage measured not by names, but by knots. And each month you tie it again. Red against skin, blood against silence, belief against forgetting. It might be just thread, but to you, it's everything. You didn't think blood could be political, but then again, you didn't think your body could be either until other people started using it as evidence. Not that you asked, but in this world, a woman's cycle doesn't belong to her. It belongs to the midwife when she checks the sheets, to the priest when he preaches on purity, to the husband when he demands proof, and sometimes to the courtroom. It begins as so many things do with marriage. The sheets are inspected the morning after, not because anyone cares if you're in love, not because anyone cares if you were kind to each other, but because they care if the linen was stained, the mark of virginity, they say, the blood on the cloth, a sign that you were untouched before and touched now. Except, sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes there's no blood. Sometimes the body doesn't cooperate with myth. And when that happens, questions follow. Whispers, accusations. Was she pure? Was she already pregnant? Was the marriage valid? And suddenly, your entire worth is being weighed by whether or not you bled in a visible, measurable way, at the right time, in the right place, on a piece of fabric someone else will hold up in judgment. You've heard of marriages being annulled over a clean sheet, of girls being sent back to their fathers shamed and whispered about their futures dimmed because of a body that didn't perform on cue. You've heard of worse. A stain misinterpreted, a cloth forged, a story spun out of absence. Even menstruation itself could be evidence or lack of it. In some trials, especially those involving claims of virginity pregnancy or piety, a woman's bleeding or failure to bleed was submitted as proof. She was either too pure or not pure enough, too fertile, or suspiciously barren. You learn to live between those lines. You learn not to speak of your period, except in the company of those who will not use it against you. You learn that silence is safer than explanation, but the world still watches. If your cycles stop, people wonder pregnant, dying touched by God. If your cycles continue late in life, they wonder something else cursed, tainted a witch. There are stories of women accused of sorcery simply because they bled at the wrong time, or not at all, or too much, because blood in a woman was never just blood. It was a sign, a message, a verdict. In some regions, a woman who failed to menstruate was said to be possessed or punished. She might be subjected to bleeding with leeches, or worse, burned herbs held under her nose to cleanse her humors. Others were forced to confess sins they hadn't committed, hoping the blood would return and absolve them. And then there were the legal cases. A girl accused of sleeping with a man swore she was innocent. Her monthly bleeding, she said, proved it. The court demanded witnesses, not of the act, but of the cloth. A noble woman's right to her dowry once hinged on whether she had begun her courses. They delayed the marriage, cited immaturity, and counted her worth by the drop. You wonder what kind of world demands that your pain be visible in order to be believed, and still keeps it too shameful to talk about. That's the paradox. Your blood is both sacred and scandalous, holy and humiliating, expected and feared, and always political. There's an academic debate as usual. Some historians argue that medieval people didn't think of menstruation as proof so much as ritual inconvenience, that most blood birth, death, wound, or womb was simply part of daily life. Others say otherwise, that menstrual blood was weaponized, used in theology, in law, in domestic control, that women were required to prove themselves not with words or deeds, but with stains. You believe them because you've lived it. You've seen what happens when blood is expected. You've seen what happens when it appears too soon or not at all. You've heard women whisper about folding a pricked finger into the sheet on their wedding night just in case. You've done the math. How many cloths? How much stain? How visible it needs to be to pass as acceptable. You once gave a younger girl advice: soak the cloth just enough that it seems believable. Not too much. Not too little. A drop of chicken blood, if desperate. She looked horrified. Then she nodded and tied the cloth in a bundle. It's not that you want to lie. It's that sometimes lying is safer than the truth. And in a world where your body is always under review, sometimes performance is survival. So you track your cycle with more precision than the village keeps the calendar. You know what to say if someone asks. You know how to fake a wince when it's expected. You know when to hide, when to fold, when to not bleed out loud. Because politics doesn't only live in castles or courts. It lives in your linen. It lives in your womb. And each month, your body casts a vote you never volunteered for. You never wanted your blood to mean more than pain. But now you understand. It's never just blood. It's evidence. It's weapon. It's law. And somehow still it's yours, even if everyone else insists on reading it like a scroll. So you keep your cloths close. You burn what must be burned. And you remember no one gets to write the story of your blood except you. Even if you do it without ink. Even if the parchment is linen. Even if the world never reads it. You used to think the blood would end things. That it marked a beginning, a middle, and one day, mercifully, an end. A neat story told in cycles. Something the body would one day forget, like a childhood bruise or an old ache. That you'd outlive it. But now, with the cloths folded one last time, and the pain settled into memory, you realize the blood doesn't leave. Not really. It stays. It stays in the way you sit always, carefully, always aware. In the way you glance at chairs before lowering yourself. In the way you fold cloth with more tenderness than food. It lives in your body even after it stops. In the muscle memory of endurance. In the quiet rituals that no longer serve you but still follow you. Lighting the fire with a hand pressed to your belly. Counting days out of habit. Avoiding white wool just in case. Even now, in the stillness of post-bleeding years, it echoes. You dream of the stains, of rags drying on the line, of slipping cloths and whispered warnings. You wake and touch your side. Nothing there. And still, you remember. Because it was never just about blood. It was about living through it. About learning how to keep moving through pain, through shame, through silence, and the blood. That was just the beginning. It taught you how to notice, how to carry discomfort without letting it spill over the rim, how to read the room, how to find other women who walked like you did, just a little slower once a month. It taught you how to survive invisibly. And that's not something you unlearn. Even now, you catch yourself making space for other women, offering them the warm spot by the fire, the soft stool, the last cloth with the smooth edge. You don't ask. You just know. Because the knowing never leaves. That's what no one tells you. The blood stops, yes. But the vigilance, the care, the wisdom, those stay. You carry them in your posture, in your patience, in the way you watch the younger ones and see all the things they don't say. And sometimes, if the wind is just right and the house is just quiet, you'll take out the old bundle just to hold it. Not because you need it, but because it held you for so long. There's no ceremony for the last time, no bell that rings, no priest who declares you changed, just a silence that stretches too long, a month that slips past, then another, and you realize it's done. You're on the other side. And what's there? Not relief exactly, not grief either, something in between, a strange calm, a softer rhythm, a deeper breath. You are no longer a bleeding woman, but you are still shaped by every time you were. And the blood, though long gone, did not wash away what matters most. It did not wash away your knowledge, or your care, or your place among the long line of women who bled and lived and bled again. It did not wash away the memory of the first time, or the worst time, or the time you laughed despite the pain. It did not wash away the way you stood in the stream at dawn, cloth in hand, and whispered a prayer that had no words. It did not wash away the red thread tied around your ankle long since cut, but never quite forgotten. It did not wash away the silence that taught you how to listen, or the fear that taught you how to fight quietly, carefully, with dignity. And above all, it did not wash away your voice, even if you never used it out loud. Even if it only whispered inside you month after month, I am still here. You once believed your blood was something to hide. Now you see it was something that marked you, not as shameful, but as surviving. Each cycle, a chapter. Each cramp, a footnote. Each stain, a sentence you were never allowed to write, but lived all the same. And now, as you sit with your bundle tucked away, the hearth warm, the night calm, you realize you may have run out of blood, but you have not run out of story. And someday, when the young ones ask, you'll tell them, not everything, just enough. Enough to show them that their pain is not new, that their silence has been shared, that their strength is inherited, because what the blood didn't wash away was the thread that connects you all. You, your mother, her mother, the girl who walked barefoot to the stream, the nun who changed her cloth by candlelight, The midwife who never said it but always knew. You're part of that. You always were, and you always will be. Even when the blood is gone, even when the cloth is folded and stored in quiet, it still hums, with memory, with dignity, with the story of every woman who ever bled and never said a word but lived anyway. So here you are, at the quiet end of a long story few were ever allowed to tell. A story written not in ink, but in cloth and memory, in pain endured without witness, in rituals whispered behind doors, in the soft knowledge passed from hand to hand. Maybe you've never lit a candle at midnight to boil herbs in a pot that no one else dared to touch. Maybe you've never tied red thread around your ankle or hidden stained linen behind firewood. But in listening, you've stepped into a lineage, one not preserved in books, but in breath, in warmth, in resilience. And maybe that's the truest kind of history. Not the kind etched on stone or preserved in scrolls, but the kind that lives in the bend of a back, the crease of a smile, the sigh of someone who's made it through one more cycle. Maybe you recognize yourself here, or someone you love, or someone you'd forgotten until now. And maybe, just maybe, it's comforting to know you're not the first to feel tired, to feel stained, to feel strong in ways no one ever saw. So tonight, let the silence hold you like a soft blanket. Let the stillness remind you come from women who knew how to endure without applause, who knew how to survive without a stage, who bled and still found time to laugh, to teach, to rest, to keep going. You're part of them now, and they're part of you. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.